So today we're going over chapter 6 in our textbook. But one of the things about groups and organizations, you'll kind of feel like you're familiar with these terms. You'll feel like you understand the words and the concepts. A lot of times in chapter 5 and chapter 6, students feel very much like this is easy, and that's okay. That's fine. I just think that, that's one of those aspects of we have to make sure that everybody kind of understands what we're talking about. All right, so we'll go over that, and then hopefully I'll be able to let you guys out a few minutes early. Everybody can go get something to eat. And let me know if you have any questions. You can always put them in chat, and I'm going to open my chat window. So, okay. And I've got chat window open, and I've got the textbook open, and we're good to go. So let's get started. One of the things that we want to always make sure is what we're talking about when we're talking about a group. Now, your text covers what is a group and how we actually look at this from a standpoint even within our political groups. So political parties groups are very important within our life. And as we're talking about this, this year, of course, is a presidential election. We have a lot of senators and congressmen and women up for re-election. But this particular section in your textbook talks about the Tea Party. And the Tea Party group, that was about 6 years ago. And they decided to come up with these belief systems. They're very anti-tax, they're anti-big government, pro-gun, and they are considered politically conservative. So they have a lot of the 15, what they came up with is this 15 non-negotiable core beliefs. So this whole idea, it's very interesting, especially in this context of the political arena that we are currently in. And I want to make sure that everyone understands that when the Tea Party came in to power, this was it was right after the Obama administration, after Obama had been elected. It's prior to Donald Trump announcing his candidacy, but it was very much this idea of gun ownership, and the budget must be balanced. Bailouts and stimulus are illegal. Political office must be available to average citizens. And so all of these different things from a Tea Party perspective, there were some things that a lot of people really liked. The national budget must be balanced. A lot of people thought that's a great idea. Deficit spending must end. A lot of people agreed with that. On any position across the aisle, Democrat, Republican. So there were certain things that were really embraced into this, but a lot of the thing they felt like was overreach. A lot of people felt like, okay, some of this is too much overreach. However, if we look at where some of the Tea Party candidates came from, they were in Alabama and California, Florida, Iowa, Kansas, Michigan, Ohio, and Texas. And what they were looking for, they were really looking for this impeachment of President Obama. based on this idea that national health care was illegal, that the threats of Obama's coming to take your guns, and other different things. It really ended up being a very big part of the Midwest, which was kind of interesting, as the Midwest had not been considered that level of conservative in years. So, but as we study groups, one of the things that we have to also look at is that we have this idea of we have shared value systems. And so again, as we always go back, we look at our primary sociological perspectives. And what we say is, what are the three perspectives? And we're looking at conflict theory, functionalist, and symbolic interactionist. Now, when we're talking about functionalist, we have to look at, and we can look at groups or the Tea Party movement, and we can say, okay, the functionalist perspective is from that big macro level that looks at how all of these different pieces of society are meshed or intertwined. And remember, functionalism is the idea that we're a well-balanced system. All parts are necessary. So we're like a living organism. And each of these roles, these parts, play in relation to the macro societal level. So at the Tea Party movement, what we might look at is how we are forcing people to pay attention to, say, the economy or the military, and the amount of money that's coming in and going out. And so that might be something that we're pushing from a functionalist perspective. From a conflict perspective, we're also looking at the large macro level. And we might be looking at the growth of inequality. So a conflict theorist looking at the Tea Party movement might consider how business interest has been manipulated and has manipulated the system over the last 30 years. Or the redistribution of wealth upward. So not from the upper class to the middle class, but this idea that the redistribution of wealth was moving from the middle class to the upper class. And we often talk of this as, when we talk about subsidies to businesses or bailouts for businesses, then we can discuss this redistribution of wealth. And the third perspective is symbolic interactionism, or interactionist perspective. And so this is not the large macro level, this is the micro level. And what we could do is look at this from a leadership style and a group dynamics. So we could also look at it and say, so we know that this idea of a national Tea Party is out there, but how are the groups? So what are the groups? Are the groups different if they're in New York? Are they different if they're in Cleveland? Are they different if they're in Boston? Are they different if they're in Albany, Georgia? If they're in Atlanta? If they're in Tallahassee? So now we have to look at who becomes the leader of the movement in these different cities. So who becomes the leader within that? And so we're looking at this from the micro level. Well, one of the things when we talk about a group, and we talk about a group project, or anytime we ever mention a group, we always think about this idea of how many people are in a group. Well, we can call a group, it's two. So just think, two people can be a group. You can have a club, and you can have friends. You can have people that work together. We might consider that a group. So the term basically means that it's two or more people, at least two people, who interact with frequency, and who share a sense that their identity is aligned with the group. So every time that we get together with people, it does not mean that we are in a group, a rally. So, for example, a rally for a political party is not a group. It doesn't actually rise to that level because it's not regular. It's not a identification of that we're aligned with the other people. We might be aligned with a certain cause or a belief system, but we may not be interacting with the people. So, for example, if you go to Starbucks or Chick-fil-A on campus, and so you are standing there in line, and let's say you go every day at 9:30. And so at 9:30, you see the same exact people standing in line at Starbucks or standing in line at Chick-fil-A. You have no identity or interaction with them other than you're all there to get coffee or chicken biscuits at 9:30 in the morning. So that's really all you have. So you're an aggregate. You're just really, you don't share a sense of identity. You're not interacting. You're just there to get your product that you want. You're a member of an aggregate or a crowd. Now, also, we can talk about categories. So a category also is a non-group. It's a lot of people who share similar characteristics, but we're totally not related or tied to anybody in anything. Maybe not even in our belief system. So if we talk about people like the baby boomers and the silent generation and the millennials and the Gen Xers, all of these people have this label. And so we're saying they are a category because they do not, as a whole, interact frequently with each other. So a lot of you may know what a millennial is, but millennials were born from 1980 to 2000. And so if you think about that right now, 1980 millennials are 40 years old. Think about that. That's kind of interesting. They're 40 years old. You know, those of you who were born during that time frame, you're considered a millennial. So if you're 20, you were born in 2000, you're considered a millennial. And you have about 20 years of people, so from 20 to 40. Here's the thing, that's a big, vast difference if we think about it from an age perspective. But the same with baby boomers. Those of us who were late baby boomers, born in 1962 to about 1964, our experiences were totally different than those who were born in the late 40s. We had completely different expectations and completely different understandings. So when you're talking about a millennial, and you might be talking about yourself as a 20-year-old or a 25-year-old, you know, you might feel that this is not really a good label for you because you did not experience some of the same socio-historical perspectives at the same time. People who were 1 year old at 9/11 were vastly different than those who were 18 years old during 9/11. And so, you know, we do look at this differently. We might consider things differently. At one, you would have absolutely no idea what was happening on 9/11. At 17, 18, 19, you would have a pretty good idea of what was going on. So all of this is really fascinating. So now people can become a group out of an aggregate or a category, but there's a whole thing on how you become a group. Do you remain a group? Or are you a group within a category? How is your group defined? Well, we have this idea of types of groups. And so there are primary groups. There's two categories of groups: primary groups and secondary groups. And primary groups, according to Charles Cooley says primary groups play the most important role in our life. And so this group is very small. It's individuals who typically engage in face-to-face long-term emotional needs. So we might think about that as our significant other, our family. And so that's the primary group. Then we have secondary groups, which are larger, and probably not personal, probably more impersonal. And so these groups might be more of an instrumental function rather than an expressive function. So in a secondary group, we might be looking at a task that we have to do and complete. So if you're assigned a group project, you're probably within a instrumental function secondary group. And can it become a primary group? Sure, it can become a primary group. We also have this idea of in groups and out groups. Very easy to understand. Sociologist William Sumner came up with this idea. An in group is the group that you, being the individual, feel like you belong to, and that you believe this is a big piece of who you are. An out group is someone who doesn't belong to that group, and we may feel competition in relation to an out group. We can be in an in group or an out group, and the examples are very similar. In fact, primary and secondary groups have in groups and out groups. Now, I'm always trying to, help students understand this perspective. So one thing is we can talk about, a lot of people talk about from family being a primary group, but it doesn't mean that you feel comfortable that you're in the family. It doesn't mean that you always feel like you belong. You may feel like you don't belong in your family. We laugh. I have this conversation quite a bit. We might consider ourselves the outcast of the family or different than the rest of our family. And so it might be that we don't feel comfortable around our family. We don't feel comfortable with them. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just how we feel, what our perceptions are. And so while we're really kind of also talking about this idea of people not being like us. And so it's also this whole idea of people not like you and your family. It may be that you are in, and I hear this a lot, and this is one of the things of having taught in universities where there are a lot of first generation students. A lot of times students will say, I don't feel like I belong anymore. I don't feel like I belong in my family, especially if they're first generation students. And a lot of times it may be that the family um, is bringing out their anxiety about you going to college and doing really well. And we have these conversations, and students always say, one of the fascinating things is I'm one of I'm in a family that I do not even feel like I belong in any family. And it's very fascinating because I'm not like any of them. I don't like the same things. I don't do the same things. I'm not enthralled with the same stuff. Um, and and someone said, well, it might be your education. And I said, it very well could be. That really put me in a different perspective of my in group or out group. So having a PhD as a female in my family, we have no PhD females in my family. I'm the first. I'm one of the few females in the family who went to college. In my generation, I am the only female who went further than a master's degree. I'm the only one who left and moved to different places. Everyone else kind of stayed near home. So the idea is that we are different and we may then feel like we're no longer a member of that group. Can you leave a group because you feel that you no longer belong? Exactly. Can you go back into a group that you maybe felt like you were out of? Absolutely. All of these things are different, and you can move in between groups. And it might be, you might feel one way one time and you may feel differently if someone else exits the group or someone else enters the group. You have to also think about this idea of group dynamics. And so within the group dynamics, this is also a part of choosing your in group and out group. We have reference groups. Reference groups are very much groups that we compare ourselves to. So in the United States, we might think about peer groups. We pay attention to what our peers wear, what music they like, all these different things. And we compare ourselves to what we see. So we also may have reference groups of people's, your culture, your family, your parents. You might have this expectation of what kind of car you're going to drive when you graduate from college, where you're going to live, what kind of house you're going to have. We might also use reference groups from an age perspective to guide us and show us behavior and social norms. But if we can identify our reference groups, then we can kind of identify who we want to be or who we do not want to be. And that's a whole interesting perspective. We have dyads, triads, and large groups. And so, of course, a dyad is 2, a triad is 3, a 3-member group. Now, remember, if a person leaves a dyad, there's no longer a group. If a person leaves a triad, there is still a group. Because you can also have different sets of relationships. If you have 3 in a group, sometimes there's a 2 against 1 dynamic. You'll see that in families that there's 3 kids. We have twins, and so whenever we invite little kids over to play, everybody gets to pick a friend to bring. That way they're not 3 and someone's not excluded. And I learned that, in elementary education. It's hard to have 3 because of the group dynamics. It's actually easier to have 4 or 5. Now, in our groups, we also have group leadership, and that makes sense, right? Because if you're in a sorority or fraternity, you're participating in Greek life, you have leadership. If you go to work, you have leadership. We kind of have to determine who is the leader. And so we have different types of leaders. We have instrumental leaders and expressive leaders. And typically, what people understand about expressive and instrumental leaders, a lot of times there's this idea that there's a gendered attachment to which way you lead. That if you're expressive, you're more concerned with emotional strength and help and making people feel supportive. That tends to be put upon as a gendered female trait of leadership. And that's not true. Every single female is not an expressive leader. We have a lot of leaders who are females who are instrumental, that are very goal-oriented and are very concerned with setting about accomplishing tasks. And we also have these ideas of different leadership styles. So you can be a leader with this function, the leadership function, but you also have a leadership style. And so you have democratic leadership, laissez-faire leadership, and authoritarian leadership. And so authoritarian, if we're talking about, they're just clear instrumental leaders, and they only want to meet the goals. That's their idea. Let's get this done, and let's meet the goals. A laissez-faire leader is pretty much hands-off and basically allows the group to kind of self-manage themselves and make their own decisions. And a democratic leader encourages the group think decision making, with also being there to help guide the group on the proper protocol of voting or coming to an agreement. Now, one of the things that we have in your text is we talk about conformity. And I know all of us like to go, hey, we're not like everybody else. We march to our own drum. We do our own thing. But at some level, we do like conformity. And conformity is basically how much we as an individual comply with a group norm or expectation. So if we dress differently because we want to stand out and want to be noticed, that's something completely different than if we dress differently and we're not wanting to stand out. We want to be hidden. In that case, we would probably try to figure out how can we conform. How can we conform to not stand out? And so one of the problems with this is that it kind of goes against this idea that we should all find our individuality. And sometimes individuality is a great thing, and sometimes it's not. And so we have to determine when is it good for us and when is it not. Now, another aspect of organizations, we have formal organizations. And this is like schools, business, healthcare. So they're all bureaucracies. And a bureaucracy is what we call an ideal type of a formal organization. And that doesn't mean that it's ideal in its best. It refers to a collection of characteristics that could describe most examples of the item under discussion. Now, let's say I ask you to picture a car in your mind. And when you're looking at this idea of a car, typically you would look at a car has 4 wheels, a windshield, seats, seat belts, but everyone's car would be different. Some people might look at a sports car, some people might look at a minivan, but it's still an automobile. And so we might have this idea that anything that we are thinking about is very individualistic, but the general idea of the car is what we would refer to as the ideal type. Now we have formal organizations that are, and there's actually a great table in your book, and it talks about the different categories of formal organizations. So normative or voluntary, coercive or utilitarian. And so if we're looking at, normative or voluntary, this is like the Audubon Society or the chess club. We want you to join because you are interested in this, in the work that we're doing. And a coercive organization is something we have to be pushed or coerced to join. So this could be like going to rehab. It could be that it is required for you to go because the benefit of the membership is coercive. So it would be to correct something that was deemed unacceptable, like rehab. The type of membership is required, but you do not have a feeling of connectedness to the other people or the organization. Now, a utilitarian is joined because there is a specific need or reward. So we could talk about high school. We could talk about college. They're utilitarian organizations because what you're trying to do is get a tangible benefit, your diploma, your degree. You're on a contractual basis as the member, which means as long as you are a student who is paying tuition fees, you're a member. Once you drop out of school, you're no longer a student. And so that's something different that we would look at. We also have some affinity. And so we might have some connectivity to our school or our institution. And that also depends on what we have from a cultural standpoint as well. Bureaucracies are considered the ideal type of formal organization. And Weber talks a lot about bureaucracies having a hierarchy of authority. And so this hierarchy of authority, we're talking about where this puts one individual in charge of everything else. So this might be the store manager, the CEO, and everyone follows a chain of command. Bureaucracies also they have clear divisions of labor. Clear division of labor. So being a professor, I teach, I also advise students, but I do not get involved in your financial aid. That's not my job. My job is to teach. My job is to advise you on what to take next, which, by the way, I think spring registration opens next week. So we also in bureaucracies have explicit rules. And so a lot of our guidelines are within the student handbook. And the explicit rules are written down and standardized, and everyone must follow the rules. So if you have a student handbook, it actually tells you exactly what you're supposed to do, how you are supposed to act, and to make sure that the rules are followed. Now, bureaucracies are also characterized by impersonality. And so this is a removal of all the personal feelings that you have, and you are just looking at this student or this customer as just a piece of the puzzle. And one of the reasons that we do that within bureaucracy is because it takes personal feelings out of professional situations. That is a huge problem. That is a huge problem for a lot of people. And so, one of the things that we look at within bureaucracy is this idea of improvement of efficiency. We can serve more people. We can handle more people. And we also have this idea of bureaucracies. Bureaucracies grew as institutions during a time frame when only privileged white males held all the power. And so if we can say that everything is structured by meritocracy, everything is meritorious, and it's a meritocracy, then what we can do is perpetuate the myth that there is merit, but there is only merit in being traditionally male and having a privileged path. One of the things about this that's interesting is the idea that political officials can only be elected if they have a lot of money. And this is changing quite a bit as people get behind younger or less moneyed individuals. And that's kind of a really key point in how some people are moving into politics. That makes a lot of sense. So we might be able to find someone that is very similar in our thought process and our beliefs and our values, and then we can support them. Okay, so what I want to know is, do you guys have any questions on groups? You guys have any questions on groups? So do you feel like this is actually an easy chapter? Do you feel like this was an easy chapter for you? Okay, I'm going to say you guys are about as tired as I am.